Hey guys, 3 and Out has its own YouTube channel, and we plan on doing coward type numbers. Here's the key. If you're watching this, you like our content, make sure you subscribe. Subscribe to the page, leave a comment, interact with our stuff. We do stuff on this page on a daily basis. 365. 3 and Out podcast right here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe right now. Okay, you guys know the drill. Let's go a little Middlekauff mailbag. At John Middlekauff, 2 F's, my last name, John Middlekauff. Fire in those DMs and get your questions answered here on the podcast. See if I can find my Instagram. There it is. We'll start here. For the mailbag. You have mentioned previously that if Harbaugh was to leave for the NFL, one of the top targets would be DeBoer. Do you think that now that they are meeting in the national championship and Washington is joining the Big Ten, that would still be a possibility, especially if Washington beats Michigan? What Kalen DeBoer has done at Washington is remarkable. He's clearly really good. It is easier to consistently win at Michigan than it is at Washington. Now, when you're a really good coach, no matter where you go, you're going to have success. So if he stayed at Washington, they would be good. But I think on a consistent basis, Michigan is a much better job than Washington. And Washington's a damn good job. Michigan's a top 5 job in the country, right? I mean, Michigan's the cream of the crop, as you're seeing what Harbaugh's doing. Right there with Ohio State, which is easily one of the best jobs in the country. LSU, Georgia, Bama. It's a small list. You know, you could argue Oregon's really become that because of Phil Knight's backing. But I think the question would be if Harbaugh leaves. If they lose, if DeBoer were to beat him and Harbaugh leaves, let's say to the Raiders or the Chargers or the Commanders or wherever, I got no clue where he's going to go. I would guess the Raiders or Chargers because he's been a West Coast guy, but now he's been in Ann Arbor for whatever since 2014. So who knows? Would be, I do wonder if Sharon Moore, the offensive coordinator, would take over. Pretty risky, though. And I know he won some games, but that to me feels a little bit like a stretch. I think the likelihood that DeBoer would be their first call, and then Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, would probably take over Washington, would be my guess. But it is possible, I guess, they could give it to Moore. They also could call Mike McDonald, who's now the Ravens offensive or defensive coordinator, who was at Michigan, but he was only there 1 year. I think if DeBoer beats him, if DeBoer beats Michigan and then Harbaugh bounces, how does Michigan not offer him the job? Now, I don't know. Listen, DeBoer's from the Dakotas. You know, he's not some elitist. This isn't Steve Sarkisian, who was born on third base, started coaching at USC at 26 years old, right? I mean, this guy beat the bushes in the shitty programs. Nobody was paying attention. Coached a bunch of guys who are probably laying sheetrock and running delis right now or cutting trees, whatever you do in the Dakotas, right? So this guy came up the hard way. I'd hire DeBoer in a heartbeat. Are you going to give out golf bets on your Go Low podcast once the season gets underway? Does the bear shit in the woods? I mean, come on. I was looking at the board for the Century. For those of you that don't follow golf, obviously the PGA Tour and LIV are still kind of going at it. There's a golf tournament this week. It's called the Tournament of Champions. So everyone that won last season is playing no cut event in Kapalua. I've never played there. My brother has. It's pretty awesome. Troon property. And the problem is no cut event. It's hard to bet on. I'm not messing with this week. I might dabble next week, depending on what happens. Now, the only guy missing this week is obviously John Rahm, who won last year, not there. But I'm not going to wager on this tournament. If I was, the Gala 50-1, I'm not going to lie. I checked the board, but it's hard. You know, I'm Scotty Scheffler. I can see Justin Thomas having a big year. Kendall from Atlanta. If you ask me, Dan Campbell and the Lions were screwed. And I believe this all began with the player eligibility. The NFL recently put out a statement saying that players 50 to 79 must declare eligibility. Same old, same old. But the NFL has done away with number eligibility. We have D linemen wearing single-digit numbers. To me, the craziest number this year by a mile is Clowney wearing 24. Whenever I see Clowney 24, I'm like, this is weird. Not going to sound like get off my lawn, old guy. Don't really like it. He's had an awesome season. I'd rather have him wearing single digits or in the 90s. 24, don't love, but listen, to each his own. Should the Lions give all the linemen numbers in the 40s? That way, no one has to declare. You can only have 6. Again, I'm no rules expert. Not everyone can be eligible, right? You have to have 5 people on the line of scrimmage that block, that aren't eligible. You can have 6 people eligible. One, including, is always the quarterback. So you usually have 5 players, whether that's running backs, tight ends, wide receivers. I think there's a DM I was kind of scrolling through that asked me, why don't you have a guy eligible every single play? An offensive lineman. Well, why would you want your offensive linemen? They're way easier to cover. They don't move as well. Even if you get like Lane Johnson or Jason Kelce in his prime, it's like they don't move as well as wide receivers and tight ends. So I think we're overthinking this a little bit. We're overthinking it. Ref screwed up. Lions got a little over aggressive, had multiple guys sticking up their hands, even though that's allowed. Listen, screw up, referees constantly, nothing new. But I just listen. I don't think it's as complicated as we're making it. Been wanting to write into the mailbag for a while, but I had a conversation I wanted your opinion on. Been a long time Penn State fan. And just today, we got Julian Fleming in the transfer portal. A coworker of mine went ballistic about how he thinks a guy who went to Ohio State should not be welcome, and that if he wasn't good enough there, he should lay in his grave. Quote. I think he means stay there, right? I'm on the belief that anything that could potentially elevate this team, especially on offense, is never a bad thing. What are your thoughts? Keep up the amazing work. We live in different times, right? In the history of the sport, pre-NIL and the transfer rule where you don't have to sit out, I would say most transfers, because when I got to Fresno State, we had a couple guys that were like Oregon transfers. They turned out to not be very good players, but when you get a chance to get a bounce back at a smaller school, you kind of take them, right? Because you never could have recruited the guy out of high school. Turns out like they didn't play there for a reason. They couldn't play for you. They weren't any good. Now it's a lot different, right? You get Jordan Addisons, you get high-end players, non-quarterbacks transferring all the time. I do understand the older players going, like, if I went to a school, especially a good school, right? Let's pick the top 20 schools. Like if you go to Oregon, you go to Washington, you go to USC, you go to Penn State. I know they're not winning any real games, but they're a real program. Ohio State, Michigan, Bama, Georgia, LSU, right? Texas, Oklahoma. And then I transfer to a direct rival. Little weird. Because you're taught at those programs, like if you go to LSU, you're taught to fucking hate Florida and hate Alabama, right? Then, well, what if I transfer to Alabama? Now, I understand once you get money, it kind of shows you we're just kind of numb to everything, which I do think the big picture, like one problem, listen, I can talk about problems in the NBA as much as anyone, not named Ethan Sherwood Strauss. The NBA, when I was a kid, when it was humming, Michael Jordan, carrying the league, making it as big as the NFL, everyone hated each other, right? Even though Michael would like play golf with Charles Barkley during the finals, it turns out he was playing mental warfare because he tried to kill him on the court and he ultimately did. But like the same guys stayed at the same places forever and they developed rivalries. You knew Gary Payton and Sean Kemp and Reggie Miller and his crew and Scotty and Michael and Patrick Ewing, and you just had these same guys on the team forever. In college football, historically, the same guys on the team until they graduated or went pro. Now, you have, like, I play at USC. It's like, oh, shit, I'll go to Oregon. I was like, it's a little weird, right? Like, it'd be really weird to go Michigan, Ohio State, or Alabama to Georgia, but it's going to happen. It's inevitable. Now, you can say money talks, shit walks, and it's true, or Texas and Oklahoma. But I wouldn't say it's diluted the product. But if you're the other team and you think the guy's an upgrade, what are you going to do? Say no? I understand the coaches wanting him. Like I do think from a player standpoint, it'd be a little weird, but maybe I'm just kind of old. Maybe you're just numb to everything because we do it in industries all the time. Jump around, competition. It's all about money. It's all about having success. So maybe it's not that crazy. I don't know the specific player. I'm not super locked into every college roster. But if you're Penn State and you can get one of Ohio State's good players, what are you going to do? Say no? It's just bizarre. I get we're older players. I heard T-Bob on Snaps talking about this. Like, we were bred to hate certain teams, despise them, right? So if you transfer into our program, I'm supposed to like you? It's kind of weird. But it's 2024, different times. Throw down on big matchups with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. This week, new customers can bet just $5 on the NFL and score $150 instantly in bonus bets. Download DraftKings Sportsbook now with code JOHN. New customers can bet $5 on the NFL action to score $150 instantly in bonus bets. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. John, the crown is yours. I enjoy your insights on the NFL. That being said, I have to question why you think the Bills are scary, but you can't trust the Chiefs. If you're giving the Bills a chance because of their quarterback, how does that not apply to Mahomes? When I say scary, it's because I've seen their high end this season a couple weeks ago against Dallas, and that was better than the Chiefs' high end. Like, the Chiefs offensively have just kind of sucked this year. And they have an all-time great offensive coach. They have an all-time great quarterback. I was watching last week MVS twice on a crossing route that he would have walked in the end zone. It went right off his belly, hit the ground. It's like, whenever I read on social media, like, why do they keep playing him? They don't have anyone else. I mean, they're not doing this because they don't have a choice. I just think this year they're snake bit. It just feels a little bit like they're snake bit. It does, the Chiefs. They won the division easily. They're down as 10 wins in a playoff victory. Do you know how many teams in the league would line up? That's your shitty season. So I think that if I was a betting man right now, Chiefs win a playoff game. I think the Bills beat the Dolphins. Then the Chiefs beat the Dolphins in the first round. And then depending on the matchup, I don't think the Chiefs would be a lock not to win another game. But I would say this year does feel like more than likely they'd be out in round 2. Could they easily win 2 playoff games? Hell yeah. Elite coach, elite quarterback, feisty defense. But their receivers can't catch. I mean, Valdez-Scantling, that drop he had on Sunday, the guy would have walked into the end zone. Listen, it's football, guys drop balls. Every time you watch the Chiefs, the ball's on the ground. They lead the league in drops. And it's not because they don't have good offensive coaching. They have elite offensive coaching. They have elite offensive scheme. They have an elite quarterback. Their offensive line, personnel-wise, has kind of struggled this year too. Is there something stopping a lineman from reporting every play? I just think this gets back to we're kind of overthinking it because it's the topic of the moment. You don't want, some of the best players on the other team are consistently their defensive linemen. So you're going to want your best offensive lineman blocking. So more often than not, the Lions are going to want Decker to block your pass rushers, right? And 2, he's not getting open consistently, right? The reason you do the trickeration, you did this back in the day with J.J. Watt, you do it now with some tackle eligibles, is because it's a trickeration. If you constantly do it, like, I can run pass plays all day long with Tyreek or Devontae Adams or David Njoku because they can get open. Part of it's getting open. And most offensive linemen can't get open without the, deception, right? And that's why the tackle eligible play is about deception. It's not because these guys are good at getting open. You're good at what you practice, right? What do offensive line practice? Blocking. I've heard other pundits say it doesn't make sense for the NFL refs to be full-time because they only need them to work 1 day a week. My question is, why couldn't get them do training 3 or 4 days a week? Going over game tape, reviewing the rule book, or even playing dodgeball so they are agile enough not to trip over Lamar Jackson. I would imagine a lot of these guys work throughout the week, spend time studying their craft. Maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they don't do shit. But I would guess you don't just memorize, the rule book. You're constantly going over that. You're constantly doing some stuff throughout the week, kind of like a side job. I would imagine some people listening have a normal W-2 job and have a side hustle. And you spend time on the side however many hours, 5, 10, 20 hours on the side doing stuff. I would imagine. Now, this is, it feels different than a side hustle. I just don't know, like, all day game tape. Like, they're just not going to do that. I think a lot of this stuff sounds good in theory. It's like academia. A lot of stuff you go into a classroom makes perfect sense. You're in Econ 101 or accounting. You're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And then you get in the real world. You're like, yeah, that ain't going to work. So it made a little more sense on the whiteboard. It happens in football too. You draw a play up on the whiteboard, then you get out, and it's like, well, that made a lot more sense till fucking Roquan Smith was running at me. That made a lot more sense till my right tackle whiffed and TJ Watt was in my ear hole. So doing game tape, practicing the rules, like I think they're doing that. I just think it's one of those jobs that you could invest more. I don't think the ROI changes much. I truly believe that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think making them full-time. What would they do all week? What would they do all week? I just don't know what they would do all week. They would justify, because one, some of these guys probably making 300, 400, 500 grand off the field. You're going to pay them $1 million. Is the ROI, does anything change? I think a lot of people think that it would just be seamless. No chance. We're dealing with human beings. Some of the best athletes in the world going rapid speed. They're going to be screw-ups. I've said it forever. As a fan, you hate it when the refs screw up. Your coaches hate it when the players hate it when the refs screw up. Me, as someone, if I'm betting on the game or rooting for a team or against, it pisses me off. The league office does not care. They do not care. Money is flowing. Ratings are up. They're not changing. And the owners ultimately ain't going to pay more. Do you think the NFL will ever address the half the distance penalty discrepancy? For example, at the end of the Lions-Cowboys game, they were on the 2. And then they were penalized 5 yards back to the 7. Then the Cowboys were penalized 5 yards, but the Lions were only given half the distance. So only back to the 3.5. Seems if you commit a 5-yard penalty and your opponents immediately commits a 5-yard penalty, the ball should go back to the 2. It's a very interesting question. I don't quite understand. Now, I'm sure the logic in the competition committee and when all the coaches and the GMs and the officials are in there, makes sense to me. You get the penalty for screwing up, even though they technically didn't screw up. The refs did, but they might have because he might not have been covered, but we're not going to keep getting into that. If you go to the 7, well, then you commit a penalty, and, because it's not 10 yards, we don't get an even amount. I only get to go half the distance. I'm with you. It should go right back to the 2. Even Lions fans have to admit, going for the 2 at the 7, little nuts, little crazy, kind of stupid. Broncos fan, we're going to draft a quarterback this year. I absolutely fell in love with Penix this year, especially in the Texas game. But his injury history scares me. I can't help but think Bo Nix is a better pick, especially for Payton's system. What's your thoughts? I think Michael Penix would be really good in Sean Payton's system. He gets rid of the ball fast, he processes quick, and he's very accurate. So even if it's dinking and dunking or short passes, like, he's good at that. And he adds a vertical element. I think the Bo Nix thing gets back to the Oregon thing that quarterbacks make me nervous. I'll never forget Mariota, who's, you could argue one of the best players in the history of the program. I thought he was kind of overrated. Wasn't very accurate. If you watched him play, he missed some passes. And physically, like, unlike Herbert, he wasn't as thick, didn't have as big of an arm. And that offense, guys are just wide open more often than not because they're just a well-coached offensive machine, and they have been for a long time. With this staff and obviously previous staffs with Chip Kelly and even early on in the Helfrich years. But the Bo Nix thing would scare me a little bit. To me, Penix is dramatically a better prospect. But I do think Nix would have some similarities with what I think he always wanted when it came to Taysom Hill. Nick's a better passer. Taysom's bigger. Now, Taysom's, 40 years old at this point. But, I mean, legitimately, I think Taysom's like 34 years old. I could see Bo Nix. I could see Sean Payton like Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix is an interesting guy. I think a lot of people, I think the Oregon offense, a little bit like the Ohio State offense, makes people nervous. What do you think about the Patriots keeping both Bills and drafting Michael Penix at number 3, whether they end up wherever they end up? I honestly believe that if Penix was on the Patriots this year, they could have won 9 to 10 games. Hell, they would have swept the Bills this past week. I have Penix as my number 1 player in this coming draft, but totally get Caleb being the number 1 because he's the better prospect, and Penix has the injury history. But from watching Penix, I think he's going to be next year's Stroud, Burrow, Luck. Well, I would say Stroud would be different than Burrow or Luck because Burrow and Luck were viewed as lock number 1 picks and then went in and immediately were sweet. Stroud, while he went number 2, I think there were a lot of question marks on him. I don't think there were any question marks with Burrow or Luck. I think when the dust settles, how does Penix not go top 5 overall? Like I said, I think he easily could go 2. Maybe, listen, the draft is about, traits as much as it is what you do on the field, which is crazy, but someone's going to fall in love with this guy. He's going to get drafted really high. The only thing to me that could really derail teams from his scent would be if medical is like he has a degenerate knee, which happens sometimes. It happens to running backs who have had knee injuries. They go to the combine, they go to the medical check, and it sets off red flag alarms. And if there are buzz or word that we don't know if his knee will hold up for a second contract, that could derail the situation. Now, as we've seen, like, doctors aren't always right. Like they said Drew Brees was never going to be the same. That's why the Miami Dolphins didn't sign him. I'd say that turned out pretty well. Now, 15, 20 years later, I saw Drew Brees that his shoulder doesn't even work now. He can't even throw his kids. So they were just off on the timeline. Hey, didn't Harbaugh lose the NFC Championship game in the rain having a rookie catch and fumble punts? Didn't he almost blow the game having a fucking freshman fumble a punt on the 3? The dude deserves to get a 35-3 beatdown in the finals. Well, I think if you go back to Kyle Williams, who was the returner against the New York Giants in Eli's second Super Bowl, the Niners' offensive weaponry was not great. They did not. It wasn't exactly like Debo, Ayuk, and company. Their wide receivers sucked. So he was out there, I would say, more on necessity than him just throwing back a rookie. It was also pouring rain. What was your other thing? Listen, it's easy to blame special teams coaches. I like doing it. You like doing it. Eventually, the player has to use his head, right? Like, what are you doing? One, I think the player freaked out because he called a fair catch. They weren't even that close to him. I think he kind of just had a mental brain fart, calls fair catch, then just gets scared, drops the ball, and let's face it, they got very lucky. If they would have lost on either a safety, whether he had fumbled it in, picks it up, and they tackled him, or he fumbles it and they fell on it and touchdown, and that's how Harbaugh lost that game, I think that would have been the worst loss in the history of football. Beside Harbaugh's play against Michigan State, didn't he get a punt blocked for a touchdown or a field goal blocked for a touchdown like his first or second year? I forget the exact moment, but definitely had one of those. Longtime Eagles fan. Very disappointed with their recent performances and coaching. What are your thoughts on Harbaugh to the Eagles? Seems like a good fit. Can Howie and Lurie pull it off? I would be a little stunned on that one. I don't see that. I don't see that happening. I think even if Sirianni were to lose the Giants and then lose in the first round, he's coming back. I mean, just a month ago, he was 10-1. But I do think he'd be in major trouble. I do think he's getting another year. But like I said, on the podcast part, if your head coach is an offensive coach and your offense is a question, your quarterback's underachieving, like that's kind of a reflection of the head guy. It's being a head coach is about more than just motivation. It's about scheming and developing and improving. And right now, Sirianni feels like he's kind of dropping the ball on that. I would be stunned if Sirianni, no matter how ugly it gets, I guess if they got shut out this weekend and shut out in the playoffs, you never say never. But Jim Harbaugh, Philly, I don't quite feel that one. This is a real question. Would you have sex with Brock Purdy's log of poop in the toilet? Thanks, and keep up the good work. That's a real DM I just got. Question for the 3 and Out podcast. I'm a Washington Commander fan, sadly. What quarterback would we go after in the draft? And number 2, we're not going to get Caleb Williams, but I'm not convinced Drake May is as good as advertised. I agree. Do you recommend we get May or Daniels in round 1 or shore up our O-line and try to get a guy like Bo Nix in round 2? He also said Penix, but I think it's pretty clear Penix not going to be there. I say this all the time. Anytime we have these questions, Patriots, Commanders, any offseason question, until I know who your coach is, it's a wasted exercise. Like, to me, Commanders, obviously Ron's getting fired Monday morning. Who's their next coach? Who's their next coach? If you told me Bill Belichick's their next coach, I could see him just loading up the roster and playing a season with Sam Howell or drafting a guy in the mid rounds. I do not think he'd be a lock to take a quarterback at number 2. Do not think it. But if you told me like Ben Johnson was their next coach, they would take a quarterback. A young coach more likely to take a quarterback to me than even Jim Harbaugh. If you told me Jim Harbaugh was the next coach, I could see him taking like an offensive lineman. So until we know the coach, the management structure of any team, it's impossible to guess what's going to happen moving forward. It really is. And I think obviously Oakland or Vegas, Chargers, who else am I missing? Tepper, Commanders, the Saints, if they miss the playoffs, he's getting fired. The Patriots situation. I'm sure there are going to be several others that we don't even quite. Atlanta. It's just impossible to know. Chicago. It's even guessing like, well, who's making the decision? Who's making the decision? Because if you tell me the Bears win this weekend and they bring everybody back, like, yeah, maybe they do keep Fields. If Fields outplays Jordan Love. Because if he outplays Jordan Love, you feel pretty good about it. Like, that's the guy you got to beat. Jordan Love's not going anywhere. He's threw 30 touchdowns. So if we can beat him on the road in Lambeau when they got to win to get into the playoffs, maybe he survives. How did Tomlin have Mason Rudolph as a third-string quarterback coming into the season? I know he has only played 2 games at this point, but he's clearly an improvement over Trubisky and even Pickett. The mismanagement is the reason I feel the Steelers need to move on from Tomlin. If you want to argue with me about Trubisky, and I've seen some comments whenever I've said that Trubisky's contract is the worst in the NFL, and people are like, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson. Well, those guys are starting quarterbacks. Deshaun's obviously wasn't very good this year, but when he played, their team won. They went like 5-1. Russell's not a $50 million guy, but you play him. He can throw touchdowns. He can keep you in games. You start Trubisky, you are guaranteed to lose. Guaranteed to lose. That's with TJ Watt, Fitzpatrick, some other good players, Highsmith. Guaranteed to lose. Guaranteed. Not just lose, but look fucking terrible. $8 million. You paid $8 million for a guaranteed loss. Yeah, Russell's overpaid, but I can win a game. Deshaun Watson's overpaid. I can win a game. You lose. You miss the playoffs because of Mr. Trubisky. You don't even sniff the playoffs if he's your starter. And when you make him your backup, he's one snap away from starting the whole season. So you can't blame Matt Canada for that. I do not believe you can blame the ownership for that. Maybe there was organizational pressure from the new GM. I don't know. I'm with you. That move, it'd be one thing if they haven't looked that much better. They've won it. They look dramatically better. They look like this team would be a real wild card team. This version is like, God, if they were the 6th seed, could they beat the Chiefs with this Mason Rudolph? I don't know if they could, but you would take them seriously. If I'm a Steeler fan, I'm pretty pissed off, right? Listen, Kenny Pickett underachieved. You drafted him. You had to play him, whatever. The moment he gets hurt, we not only went to Trubisky, we went with him for a while. What was the game? Oh, it was the Colts game when they threw in Mason at the end, 2 minutes left to go in the game. Why didn't we fucking do this at halftime? That game alone cost you the playoffs. If you could have just went to him in the bullpen at halftime. There was this loyalty to Trubisky like he was Roethlisberger. Crazy. Michael Lombardi mentioned that Vrabel's contract is up. If true, he'd be a top candidate for most teams. No? Chargers, yeah. One thing's pretty clear is the buzz on Vrabel was not that he was going to get fired, which kind of felt like a couple months ago. It's like, what's going on there? he doesn't like it, right? And what he clearly doesn't like, the structure, something with ownership, this new GM, and he's got options. Because anytime you've won playoff games, you have his resume as a player, you have his respect around the league, he would be a lock hire. You could argue if him and Tomlin were available, like who would you rather have? Similar guy, right? In terms of just tough, old school. The other thing, if Arthur Smith gets fired, if you're Mike Vrabel, you just bring Arthur Smith as your offensive coordinator. And after what we just witnessed in Atlanta, I mean, Arthur Smith, like he ain't getting another job for a couple years. So you basically get Arthur Smith and Vrabel. It's why I think Belichick is kind of interesting as a head coach. Obviously, he's Bill Belichick, but like he gets to reunite with Josh McDaniels if he wants to. So part of it's a package deal. If I'm going to hire a defensive coach, who's your offensive coordinator? That's why I like, Colin's big thing on offensive coaches, because when I hire you, you call the plays. I give Sean Payton $90 million. Listen, we might have issues. I know that guy's calling the plays. Andy Reid, McVay, Kyle, LaFleur. What the fuck's Sirianni doing? Even Daboll, CEO, head coach. Your offense is terrible. I mean, Daboll's offense is atrocious. You're the offensive coach. Your defense is good. The defense coordinator doesn't even want to be there anymore. I think we'll end on that. So keep firing those DMs at John Middlekauff. Have a good, hopefully everyone's having a good week. We only get to say Happy New Year for a couple more days. So Happy New Year. See you soon.